Hey, welcome back to the NC State Insider Podcast. I'm your host and lead beat writer, Tucker Sennett, joining you here today to talk more about NC State football coming off of this loss to Pitt, 53 to 34 up there in Pittsburgh, and sort of the aftermath and a little bit of what Dave Doran said in his press conference today on Monday. Um, just sort of providing you with the state of this NC State program and where things are at in that sense. So, in case you didn't see the game, NC State did not play very well coming out of the bye. The defense really struggled, obviously, gave up 53 points to Pitt, a red hot team that it is in the mix in the ACC. And NC State looked like a team that it, is not competing and not competitive with the teams that are higher level in this conference. And of course, we're back where we were in terms of fan noise from before that Campbell game about Dave Doran after those back-to-back losses. They obviously came out, beat Campbell. Noise sort of got quelled a little bit, then lost to Notre Dame, but that was a top at the time 16 team in the country, now pushing towards the top 10. So, that wasn't a game that I think a lot of NC State fans expected to win, but this was one that I think a lot of people had circled in this final 5 game stretch as one of the winnable games on the schedule, and they just looked non-competitive with this team. They were in the game at the beginning based on some kind of fluky big plays, and that kept their hopes up. But the defense just has been a complete disaster. And Dave Doran said today that you can't expect to be on track defensively when you lose 9 out of your top 12 or 20. I guess he said 22 defenders. Um, so they're pretty devastated in terms of depth on that side of the football. And that's pretty evident in the way that they're playing. And he's continuing to harp on the lack of execution, but I just think there's a talent issue with this team. The talent is on the injured list, or not on the field. They're on the sideline right now, and this wasn't a super strong group in terms of talent coming into the season. And I think there were some guys who surprised them early on. An AJ Richardson who played well at linebacker. Obviously, you got the two transfers in Sean Brown and Kean Sloan, or sorry, Sebastian Harsh and Kean Sloan, who came over from the Mountain West, who have been really, really solid. But they can only do so much. And at a certain point, you have to have depth beyond two guys on your defensive line. You got to have depth at every level of the defense. And it's pretty clear that in the transfer portal and through recruiting, the development hasn't been there. It's not up to the par that this program has had. And yes, this is a younger team coming, or this was a younger team coming in the season, and now it's like a incredibly young team because you got redshirt freshmen that Doran said today weren't supposed to play in this season. That wasn't their plan with some of these guys, and out of necessity, they've become critical members of this defense, of this offense, and that's really hard to work with for a coaching staff. So I do think, it's difficult to judge Doran and this coaching staff based on, the personnel. But at the end of the day, you have to recruit and you have to acquire talent through the portal. And NC State's talent has not been up to par compared to the teams that it has played to this point. And they've played some teams that have operated through the transfer portal, in a team like Duke that went and got its quote unquote franchise quarterback and got him some help in the portal, and they exploded offensively. You played a team like Notre Dame that didn't operate in the portal, that is relying a little bit more on depth, but is an iconic program and found a way to win. And then Pitt kind of stuck with a lot of key figures from last season's team, but also supplemented with talent. And they made a change at quarterback when they felt like they needed to. And they're 4-0 since making that change, and Narduzzi is pushing them towards being a serious disruptor in the ACC. As for the rest of Doran's press conference today, I think there were some interesting things that he said about, his future, and I've written about this. You can check out my new article on it, but um, it's a really tricky situation for NC State because you can tell Dave Doran's heart is still in it. He wants to coach. He loves coaching. I don't think there's any doubt about that. It's more just the game is so results based now. I mean, we just have Brian Kelly getting fired at LSU after that loss, and obviously that was not a perfect cultural fit and a sort of a different situation, but that's now 8 power conference jobs that are open, and it's going to be a feeding frenzy for head coaching hires. And you're probably not going to be able to pick out of that playoff pool right away. That's going to be interesting if some of those teams have to wait and see into much later in the season, and then those coaches are kind of working from behind recruiting wise. So if you're NC State and let's say hypothetically this is the end of the road for Dave Doran, where do you rank amongst those 8 schools, those 8 power conference schools? There's going to be other jobs that are open as well. Um, but those 8 power conference schools, where do you rank? Where do you fit on a coach's list of potential jobs, and how do you compete? And I don't. It would be really difficult conversation to have come December if this team is not 6-6 by then, which I think is kind of about as high as I'm willing to go. And I think Dave Dorn said today, he's not willing to think about that until the season is getting to that point. I think this is a really difficult time for this football program. I think it's a difficult time to be a college football coach right now. That's 500 with a fan base that has been, as Boo Corrigan said a couple weeks ago, the societal behavior has shifted. There's a culture and a need for immediate gratification amongst college football fans and pro fans because in the NFL, coaches get fired like it's nothing. And I've talked about this before. There's a human element to it. And I think the situation does not warrant firing Dave Dorn. It's not you're there's no actual toxicity around this program. It's noise. And I've talked about noise before on this podcast. I've written about the noise. I've covered this all. There's nothing to indicate that inside this team there are problems or anything of that sort. This team wants to win. It's just not happening. And that's where I get back to the talent issue. And this team has talent. It has one of the best running backs in the nation. It has an up and coming quarterback that hasn't lived up to the hype over the last 3 weeks, but showed you what he could be in those first 3 weeks of the season and obviously looked really good against an FCS opponent in Campbell recently, but just he's struggling right now. And you have a star tight end, you have these pieces offensively that you might not have had in the past, and it hasn't quite clicked. And then defensively, you still have good players, but not across the board. And so to me, it's more of a talent issue. And I understand the complaints about the lack of development of some of these pieces, but you also have to look at the guys who have developed, who you wouldn't have known about a couple years ago. A Devin Marshall, who's become a lockdown corner. These two enormous transfers from the Mountain West who have been excellent since coming over. Jamel Johnson, who came over from Temple, he's been solid at corner. Assad Brown has switched positions twice this season and looks like a really solid piece as a redshirt freshman. It's not it doesn't happen overnight, and Dave Doran's such a process focused guy that I think he's confident in his direction. And I think at the end of the day, it's going to be his decision whether he wants to coach this team next year or not. And I think the school and the program, as much as it might pain the most frustrated NC State fans to hear, is better off with Dave Doran for another year than it would be without him. And I know there's a world where he walks away. He's said in the past that it's a year-to-year thing for him, and I would understand that. He's been through, over a decade of leading this program to new highs and some lows. And this season, while not like the lowest of lows, feels like a little bit of a disappointment given, they kept their guy at quarterback. They built the coaching staff on that side of the football around him, and it hasn't really clicked. And I think I understand the frustration with that amongst fans from an objective standpoint, but I also understand that this team was picked to finish in the back end of the ACC. It's not like we were the media and anybody whose job like it is mine to analyze this team was expecting this to be one of the more competitive programs in the ACC. I think more people thought, they might be more towards that upper middle than the lower middle, but I just think the reaction that there is around this program is tough for Dave Doran to have to listen to every week. And I think, at the end of the day, he just wants to coach football. And that might be a reason for him to walk away because the world has changed so much to the point where you can't hide from it anymore. You just can't. And that's the case around the country. And some coaches have bought in, others have resisted and survived, but it's hard. And I think it eats at them and it's certainly eating at Doran right now, and he's frustrated with what's going on the field, and to have to answer these questions time and time again, I think is certainly frustrating. So that's kind of my rant of the day. I know these football talks are getting a little bit deep, but that's just where this NC State program is right now. It's a unique situation. I can't comment one way or the other on where I think this is going, but I think this Georgia Tech game will be a great test of this program's mettle. I think, if they can come out and compete with one of the best teams in the country and at least look like they belong on the same field, that's a win. Obviously it would be great to shock the world and upset this Georgia Tech team for Dave Doran, but I don't see that happening. The way that Georgia Tech plays is not super conducive to what NC State has been successful against. And I really I really like Haynes King. He's a fantastic quarterback and kind of a nightmare for this NC State defense. Really, really going to be tough to stop him. And I think they know that already. So we'll talk more about the Georgia Tech matchup as the week moves on, and obviously I'll keep you in the loop on sort of what the temperature is inside this program as I continue to find out what happens there, and we'll go from there. But as always, if you want more content, hit up my social media feed at Senate Tucker for good impartial views of the Wolfpack football program. And we got basketball starting, so always some good content there. You can hit up the website, Twitter account at Wolfpack on SI. And of course, if you want daily episodes of the NC State Insider Podcast, subscribe to the sports videos on SI YouTube channel. You can get them every day. We'll see you next time.